The waves crashed softly against the weathered pier, their rhythm steady and hypnotic. Amelia stood at the edge, her suitcase beside her, watching the endless gray horizon dissolve into mist. She had dreamed of this moment for years, the day she'd finally leave behind the quiet fishing village where everyone knew her name, her past, and the mistakes she could never seem to escape. She was 23 and restless, with the kind of ambition that felt too large for the narrow streets and the smell of salt and fish that clung to everything. Her mother had begged her to stay. "You have everything here," she said, her voice trembling. But Amelia didn't want everything here. She wanted something more. Though she couldn't define what that more was, the bus came at dawn, its headlights slicing through the fog. Amelia took one last look at the ocean. For years, it had been her confidant, the only witness to her tears, her whispered dreams, her silent prayers. Now, it was just water. She turned away, the wind tugging at her coat, and boarded the bus without looking back. The city was everything she thought it would be: loud, bright, alive. The buildings reached for the sky like they were trying to escape gravity itself. Amelia found a small apartment in a crumbling building that smelled of paint and cigarettes. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She took a deep breath and told herself that this was where her real life would begin. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. She found work at a cafe, the kind with flickering lights, mismatched chairs, and regulars who pretended they didn't see each other. Her hands ached from carrying trays, and the tips were barely enough to cover rent, but she didn't mind. Every morning, she stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching people rush by in their pressed suits and polished shoes. They looked so sure of where they were going. She envied that 18 night she'd walk to the river. It wasn't the sea, but it moved and breathed in a way that felt familiar. The city lights shimmered on its surface, breaking into shards of gold. Sometimes, she'd close her eyes and imagine she was back home, that if she opened them, she'd see the old wooden pier and her mother's lantern glowing in the distance. But when she opened them again, there was only the hum of traffic and the taste of loneliness in the air. One evening, a man came into the cafe. He was older than her, maybe 30, with dark hair that curled slightly when it rained and eyes that carried something heavy, like he, too, was running from a place he didn't want to remember. His name was Elias. He ordered black coffee and sat by the window every evening after that. For weeks, they exchanged only small smiles, fragments of conversation, until one night he said, "You look like someone who misses the sea." She froze. "How would you know?" He shrugged. "Because I miss it too." That was how it began, with shared silences and stories told between sips of coffee. Elias was a musician, or at least he used to be. He played the piano in smoky bars and once dreamed of performing on big stages. But dreams, he said, were fragile things. You chase them long enough, and sometimes they run faster than you. Amelia understood that better than she wanted to admit. They started spending more time together. Sometimes they'd walk along the river at night, talking about everything and nothing. Elias told her about his father, who never understood why music mattered. Amelia told him about her mother, who never understood why leaving mattered, that he made her laugh again, something she hadn't done in months. But more than that, he made her feel seen, not as a stranger in a city of millions, but as someone who mattered. Yet, even as their bond grew, Amelia felt the old restlessness stirring again. The city that once felt full of promise now felt like a maze. She was still waiting. For what? She didn't know. Maybe for her life to finally make sense. Maybe for a reason to stop running. One night, after Elias played a small gig in a dimly lit bar, he found her outside, sitting on the curb. The rain had started to fall, soft and steady. "Why do you always look like you're somewhere else?" he asked gently. "Because I am," she whispered. He sat beside her. "You know, sometimes I think people like us, the ones who run, we're just trying to find the version of ourselves that got left behind." Amelia looked at him, the rain glistening on his face. "And what if we never find it?" "Then maybe," he said softly, "we learn to start over." They sat there for a long time, saying nothing. The rain washed over them, cleansing, cold, real. In that moment, Amelia realized something. Maybe she hadn't come to the city to find freedom. Maybe she had come to lose something, the fear that had held her captive her whole life. That night, when she got home, she stood by the window and looked out at the river. She thought of her mother's voice, of the sea, of all the things she had tried to forget. For the first time, she didn't feel like running. She just stood there, breathing, listening to the heartbeat of the city, to the echo of the waves in her memory. And somewhere in the distance, she swore she could hear the sound of the sea. The city changed with the seasons. The soft warmth of spring faded into the heavy, shimmering heat of summer, and Amelia found herself waking earlier just to walk before the streets filled with noise. There was something strangely peaceful about those quiet hours when the air still smelled of dew and fresh bread from the bakery downstairs. Elias was still a constant in her life, though neither of them dared to define what they were. They shared mornings over cheap coffee, evenings filled with laughter, and long nights that always ended with unspoken words hanging between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something fragile and real, like a song only they could hear. One night, after closing the cafe, Amelia found Elias sitting at the old piano in the back corner. His fingers drifted across the keys, the melody soft and broken, like a confession. She leaned against the doorway, listening. "That's beautiful," she said quietly. He smiled faintly without looking up. "It's unfinished." "Everything beautiful is," she replied. That was how they were, unfinished. Two people trying to stitch meaning out of the loose threads of their lives. But as the days turned into months, Amelia began to notice small changes in Elias. The late-night calls he didn't answer. The way his laughter sometimes sounded forced. The nights he disappeared without explanation. When she finally asked, he said, "I'm just tired." "Don't worry." But she did. One evening, she followed him after his gig, not because she wanted to spy, but because she couldn't stand the uncertainty anymore. He walked along the river, down to a small, nearly abandoned part of the city. There, in a crumbling building with broken windows, she saw him meet an older man. Their conversation was quiet, intense. Money changed hands. Elias looked older when he turned away, his shoulders hunched, his expression unreadable. Amelia didn't follow him back. She went home and sat in the dark, the silence pressing down on her like a weight. The next morning, he came to see her. "I need to tell you something," he said. His eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept. "I used to owe people. Bad people. When my music didn't work out, I borrowed money. I thought I could fix it, but—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I've been trying to make it right." Amelia wanted to be angry, but she couldn't. She understood desperation, the kind that made you do things you hated yourself for. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to see me like this." She reached for his hand. "Elias, I already see you." He smiled weakly, then pulled her into his arms. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," she whispered. "But it's honest." For a while, things were fragile but steady. They found comfort in small things, cooking together, walking along the river, sitting on the roof with music playing softly from Elias's phone. But one night, everything changed. Amelia came home to find the apartment door slightly open. Inside, drawers were pulled out, things scattered. And Elias, gone. On the kitchen table was a single sheet of paper. "I'm sorry, Amelia. Don't look for me. Some mistakes follow you, no matter how far you run." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She sank to the floor, the letter trembling in her hand. For a long time, she couldn't move. The city outside continued to hum and breathe, unaware that her world had just collapsed. Days passed. She went to work, smiled at customers, washed dishes, but everything felt hollow. At night, she returned to the empty apartment and sat by the window, staring at the river. She didn't know if Elias was alive or where he'd gone. But then one morning, a small envelope arrived in her mailbox. No return address, only her name written in Elias's handwriting. Inside was a photograph of a coastal town, cliffs, waves, a lighthouse in the distance, and a note that said, "Find the sound of the sea." Amelia stared at it for hours. She didn't know if it was a goodbye or a call for help. But something deep inside her stirred, the same restlessness that once drove her to leave home. Only now, it wasn't about running away. It was about finding what she'd lost. She quit her job the next day, packed a single suitcase, bought a train ticket to the coast. The journey was long and quiet. The further she went, the more the city seemed to dissolve behind her. The noise, the lights, the endless race for something undefined. When she finally stepped off the train, the air smelled of salt and rain. She followed the road until she saw it. the lighthouse from the photograph. And there, sitting on a rock near the edge of the cliff, was Elias. He looked thinner, worn down by whatever ghosts he'd been carrying. But when he saw her, his eyes softened. "You shouldn't have come. You sent me a picture," she said quietly. "You knew I would." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I guess I did." They sat in silence for a long time, the waves crashing below them. Finally, Amelia asked, "Are you in trouble?" "Not anymore," he said. "I paid what I owed. But I had to disappear for a while. I couldn't drag you into it." She wanted to scream, to tell him that he had already dragged her into his world, his pain, his absence. But instead, she whispered, "I just wanted to know you were alive." "I am," he said, "but I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore." "Maybe neither of us does," she said softly. "Maybe that's okay." They sat there until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sea gold and crimson. For the first time in months, Amelia felt still, not because she had found all the answers, but because she had stopped searching for them. That night, she stayed in a small inn by the shore. The wind rattled the windows, and the sea whispered like an old friend. She dreamed of the pier back home, of her mother's lantern glowing faintly in the dark. When she woke, Elias was gone again. On the nightstand lay a note. "Don't wait for me, but don't stop listening. The sea has a way of bringing people home." Amelia pressed the note to her chest. She didn't cry this time. She understood now that some people were meant to pass through our lives, not stay in them. Still, she walked to the cliff again, watching the horizon. The wind tangled her hair, and the waves crashed below, steady and endless. Somewhere out there, Elias was chasing his own peace. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of being alone, because she knew the sea would always remember her. The train ride back home felt like a dream Amelia wasn't ready to wake from. The coastal air still clung to her clothes, the faint sound of the sea echoing in her memory. She had spent weeks by the lighthouse, walking the cliffs, listening to the waves crash like a heartbeat beneath the sky. It was there she realized she couldn't keep living in fragments, one part running from her past, one part waiting for a man who had already drifted beyond reach. She needed to go home, even if home no longer remembered her. As the train rattled through fields and valleys, her reflection stared back at her from the window, older, thinner, but steadier. She barely recognized herself. The last time she had seen this view, she had been a restless girl clutching a suitcase and 1,000 unanswered dreams. Now, she was coming back with fewer illusions but a heart that finally knew how to feel again. The town looked smaller when she arrived, quieter. The same cracked pavement, the same rusted bus stop sign. The old bakery still stood at the corner, though its window now displayed closed for renovation. Across the street, she saw the house, faded paint, ivy crawling up the fence, curtains drawn. For a long time, she stood on the sidewalk, afraid to move closer. When she finally knocked, no one answered. But the door wasn't locked. The hinges groaned softly as she pushed it open. "Mom?" Her voice wavered in the still "Aired," and no reply. Just the distant ticking of the kitchen clock. She stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The furniture hadn't changed. The same armchair by the window, the same framed photo of her parents smiling by the river. And there, on the table, was the small lantern her mother used to light whenever Amelia came home late. It still had a candle inside. Before she could take another step, a voice came from the hallway. "Amelia?" Her mother stood there, smaller than she remembered, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then her mother dropped the dish towel in her hand and whispered, "You came back." Amelia felt her throat tighten. "I didn't know if I should." "Oh, my child," her mother said softly, her voice trembling. "I've been lighting that lantern every night. I never stopped waiting. That was all it took." Amelia ran to her, and her mother's arms wrapped around her, warm and trembling. The years of silence melted in an instant, replaced by the sound of muffled sobs and 1,000 unsaid apologies. They sat at the kitchen table for hours, talking through the years that had separated them. Her mother told her how the shop had closed, how the neighbors had moved away, how quiet the house had become. Amelia told her about the city, about Elias, about the endless searching that had finally led her back here to T1 point. Her mother reached across the table, taking her hand. "You always had to see the world for yourself," she said gently. I was afraid you'd never come back, but I never wanted you to feel trapped here. Maybe I just didn't know how to tell you that. I thought you were disappointed in me," Amelia whispered. "I was never disappointed," her mother said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Only scared. I wanted to protect you from pain, but life doesn't let us do that, does it?" Amelia shook her head. "No, it doesn't." That night, Amelia couldn't sleep. She walked through the house, touching the walls, the shelves, the windows she had once pressed her face against as a child. Everything was the same, yet everything had changed. Her room still had the faded wallpaper with painted stars. Her old journal sat on the desk, untouched. When she opened it, the last entry read, "Someday I'll leave and find who I'm supposed to be." She smiled faintly and whispered, "You did, little one. You did, even if it took longer than you thought." The next morning, she went to the river. The same willow trees bent low over the water. The same wooden pier stretched into the fog. She sat there for a long time, her feet dangling above the ripples. Somewhere deep inside, she felt Elias's absence, not as pain, but as gratitude. He had been part of the journey, not the destination. As the sun rose, her mother joined her on the pier, carrying 2 cups of tea. They sat side by side in silence. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Amelia asked quietly. Her mother took a slow sip before answering. "Every parent does. But if things had been different, maybe you wouldn't have found your way back. Sometimes we need to be lost before we can come home." Amelia nodded, feeling a tear slip down her cheek. "I used to blame you for so many things. For being too strict, too afraid, too small town. But I think I was just scared of becoming you." Her mother smiled gently. "And now I think I'd be lucky if I did." The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life slowly returned. Amelia helped repair the shop, repaint the walls, clear the garden. The townspeople who still remembered her stopped by, curious and kind. There was a calmness in her she hadn't felt in years. Every evening, she lit the lantern by the window, the same one her mother had kept burning all those lonely nights. One evening, while organizing old boxes in the attic, she found a stack of letters she had written but never sent, words filled with anger, fear, and longing. She read through them, realizing how much she had misunderstood both herself and her mother. She took them outside, built a small fire, and one by one, fed the pages to the flames. The wind carried the ashes into the night sky like tiny stars. When her mother saw her, she didn't ask questions. She just stood beside her, watching the last letter burn. "Letting go?" she asked softly. Amelia nodded. Finally, her mother smiled, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "Then maybe it's time to write new ones." A few days later, Amelia walked to the river again, carrying a notebook. She began to write, not about regret, but about everything she had learned. About kindness, mistakes, forgiveness. About the people who come into our lives and the ones who leave. About how sometimes love means letting go, and sometimes it means coming back. The story poured out of her like water, gentle and unstoppable. She didn't know what she would do with it yet. Maybe share it. Maybe keep it just for herself. But she knew it mattered. That night, as she finished the last page, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the trees, rain tapping against the windows. Amelia ran to the window to bring the lantern inside, but stopped. The flame flickered wildly, then steadied, glowing stronger than before. She smiled. The lantern had survived storms before. In the morning, the air was clean and bright. The river shimmered, the world washed new. Amelia stood on the porch, watching the sun climb above the hills. Her mother joined her, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "What now?" her mother asked. "I don't know," Amelia said honestly. "But wherever I go next, I won't be running this time." Her mother nodded. "Then you're ready." Amelia looked at the horizon, at the light breaking over the water, at the town she once couldn't wait to escape. For the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a beginning, and when night came, the lantern burned again, not as a symbol of waiting, but of hope, of home, of the truth that even after all the storms and years apart, love always finds its way back, because some lights never go out.